My name is Rachel Gerds, and it's a pleasure to be here today talking about my top tips for launching a chatbot. So I'm fully aware that I'm one of the last speakers standing between you and cocktails and spa services, so I'll try to keep this as lively and entertaining as possible. So, what are we going to cover today? First of all, I'll give you a bit of background about me and some of my experience with BMO and prior to that as well. We'll talk about to bot or not to bot. That is the question. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, we want to tackle the question of, is a bot right for your brand and your business in the first place? Next up, a topic that tends to come up often when we think about chatbots, and that's the name. So what's in a name and what's the importance there? And lastly, we'll talk about keeping it real. And under that theme, we're going to touch on giving your bot a personality and really embedding it in a character and a persona. So first up, a bit about me. I am originally from Michigan, and yes, I can show you where I'm from on my hand. It's a very charming thing us Michiganders do. I've been in Chicago, though, for almost 10 years, about to hit my 10-year mark. However, I have to say I have stayed loyal to my Detroit sports teams. Don't hold it against me. In terms of my professional experience, I started my career at Commonwealth Edison, the electric utility here in Chicago, and I realize typically people don't have a ton of affection for their electric utility. However, I have to say ComEd was, and they're not paying me to say this, but ComEd was an awesome place to start my career. I was really able to cut my teeth in the world of corporate communications and work on things like crisis comms, executive comms, and so I'm very grateful for my experience there. And then for the past 9 or so years, I've been with BMO Financial Group. So how many people are familiar with BMO? I know we have some BMO members in the audience. So BMO is a highly diversified financial institution with global outposts in corporate, wealth, retail, commercial banking. Here in Chicago, we operate under the BMO Harris brand name. In terms of my experience at BMO, I started in the corporate communications department and then transitioned over to marketing communications in 2012. And since then, I've been delving deeper and deeper into the digital marketing side of things, including launching our chatbots. So in Canada, BMO has the BMO skill for Alexa, so a voice-based experience there. And then we also have Twitter Quick Reply as well as a Facebook Messenger chatbot that recently launched. So I'll touch a little bit on that experience as well. So banking and utilities, I really have a knack for finding industries that consumers have lots of love and affection for. So it makes the marketing communications job really easy, of course. And now we'll jump into the nitty-gritty. So to bot or not to bot? So first off, when we say chatbot or virtual assistant, or perhaps there's another moniker that they go by, let's just clarify up front a little bit about what we mean when we say that. So there's a varying level of sophistication when we talk about chatbots, and essentially at the most basic level, we're talking about a program that is designed to respond to specific commands. As simple as that. Now, when we move towards the more sophisticated end of the spectrum, that's where you start to introduce artificial intelligence and machine learning, and what that means is that your bot is able to learn and evolve, and you're not just sort of stuck with that initial set of commands that you've created. So a common question might be, well, if these are the different ends of the spectrum, where should I start if I'm thinking about launching a chatbot? My advice would be to start on the basic end. Make sure you're partnering with a vendor or technology platform that can help you grow and evolve to that more sophisticated end and take advantage of machine learning. But I'll touch on in just a moment the risks of launching a chatbot, because we all want to have our eyes wide open in terms of what we're getting into. And so because of those risks, I would advise start small, start simple, and start on the basic end. So chatbots don't always go perfectly. Oops. Oh, shoot. And also my presentation doesn't always go perfectly. I can just go into presentation mode, right?
Yes, okay.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Sorry. So we have sort of a tame example here of a text-based chatbot where you can see a user is having to say something more than once in order for the bot to actually understand what it's saying. So very tame example of, not a great experience that you're creating. There are less tame examples out there of, AI-based chatbots that have not gone so well. I won't call out any brands by name, of course, but you may be familiar with some of those instances where, again, sort of backed by AI and machine learning, those bots can sort of take a turn towards what I would describe as Black Mirror sort of direction. So again, really important to be aware up front of what you're getting into and really manage against those risks. So in addition to that reputational risk, Harvard Business Review reported last year that chatbots generally fail to complete 70% of user requests. So said a different way, only 30% of user interactions are completed successfully without involving a human. So again, not necessarily a statistic that you want to be part of, so being really thoughtful about the experience that you're creating, being as narrow as you can, and really going for quality over quantity is what I would advise. So we've talked about sort of the risks, but what are the potential rewards? Chatbots have a huge upside potential in terms of course, they impact the customer experience, right? You can create that really impactful, compelling experience and personality to go along with your bot. But there's also an opportunity to improve business outcomes. So sales, you think about cross-sell or share of wallet, suggesting purchases, cost savings. Can you answer questions more quickly or serve the customer for a lower cost? So there are a lot of options here, and this is by no means comprehensive, but I would encourage you to, if this is something that you're thinking about, perhaps have a use case in mind as we go through this to sort of pressure test it with the different tips and considerations that we'll throw out. So getting back to that question, how do you evaluate, do I move forward with a bot or do I not? A few tips here. What I would say is, number one, it's really easy as marketers and communicators to sort of get distracted by the shiny new toy or tool that we have in our arsenal. And chatbots are still relatively shiny and relatively new. So I would say be wary of getting distracted by that, which leads nicely into the next point, which is make sure you have a business case backing up your use case here. So I'll talk in a minute about how we handled this at BMO. And again, start small. So find a niche use case and really make sure you're getting it right. And so the way we did that at BMO was focusing on FAQs. So we had a hypothesis that if we could answer customer questions before they got to the point where they picked up the phone and called the call center, or before they went to one of our social channels and messaged one of our social care agents, well, that could potentially reduce our cost to serve because a chatbot's a cheaper way to do that than staffing it with a human being. So we focused on cross-referencing the top questions that we got at our call center that could be answered with a chatbot and the top questions that we got from our social care agents that could be answered with a chatbot. And we came up with sort of a starting list of FAQs where we wanted to be able to head those questions off at the pass and answer them within that chatbot experience. And so certainly early days, but trend-wise, we were seeing reduction in call center volume following the launch of our bots. So it's great news. So let's move on to a topic that, as I said earlier, comes up often when we think about launching a chatbot, and that's the name. So we see a number of different approaches, and when we think about the importance of a name, it's really about imbuing that personality and that character. And this will be oversimplifying it a bit, but thinking about names, there's different connotations with every name that we hear. There are certain images and characteristics that come to mind when you hear a name, whether we like it or not. And the same is true with the name of your bot. So there are a number of different approaches that brands take and that you could consider taking as well. For BMO, we went with what I'm calling the quirky nickname route with BMO Bolts. So obviously there's an alliteration there that's nice. The other thing about Bolts that we liked is that it was indicative of the experience that we're creating. So it sets a little bit of context for the customer around what they can expect to get. And there's that speed element, obviously. Next is brand integrated. So similar to Bank of America, took the second half of America and went with Erica for their personal virtual assistant. Perhaps the most ubiquitous of all chatbots, Amazon Alexa. The whole idea of picking a female persona, I think, is a really interesting one. You tend to see a lot of chatbots or virtual assistants with female personas or voices or names. So that's interesting. And then we have the gender neutral option as well, which Capital One chose with Eno, which is just one spelled backwards. Gender neutral, perhaps a more inclusive approach, one might argue. And then lastly, there is the option, of course, of going with no name. And I realize I might sound a bit like I'm contradicting myself because we just talked about the power of a name and sort of establishing that personality. However, I will say that if you're at a place where you're not able to land on a name or can't agree on one, I think it's perfectly acceptable to move forward without a name and introduce the experience as, hi, I'm your virtual assistant. I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that. I think it's more important to sort of get it right because you are making a commitment when you establish that name. It's really something you need to stick with. So again, touched on this a little bit, but there are pros and cons to each of these approaches. So some backlash here with this headline around, is it sexist that all of these virtual assistants have that kind of female persona? Not sure what your take is on that, but if I put my PR hat on, I would advise you to put yourself in the shoes of your haters, if you will, and think about what are the ways that your name or any other part of your experience could be viewed in a negative light, and make sure you have that kind of justification ready to go. So last topic, keeping it real. So this is really about the authenticity and humanity that we want to create when we're creating that chatbot experience. So let me ask you, is anyone here familiar with the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas? Yes, are you all familiar with Rose as well? No? Okay. So Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas, their virtual concierge, if you will, her name is Rose. And Rose can help you with a number of different tasks. She can tell you a joke and help you kill some time. Maybe you're waiting for your room to get ready and check in. Maybe you need some dinner reservations for the night. Rose can hook you up with that, maybe even get you a discount. So a number of different functions that Rose can serve for the customers of the Cosmopolitan and really add value to their experience. And one thing is for sure, I'm sure you can tell by this example, Rose has personality for days. She oozes personality, and it makes it a really memorable, compelling experience if you're interacting with that. By the way, you can feel free to text that number and you can start to have the Rose experience even though you're not in Las Vegas. So this is a great example of kind of the power of the content within your chatbot. And really, again, getting back to keeping it real, figuring out who is this person? Who is this persona? What characteristics do they have? and documenting that. That can be really powerful for the people on your team or other teams who are creating the content that fuels this experience, for them to really have an understanding of how this person would interact. Would they respond with a GIF or an emoji, or none of those at all? So important to really have that tone and personality nailed down and imbue it throughout your experience. So not only does Rose create that great customer experience, but as we can see here from the digital marketing team, she's also driving increased revenue. So people who interact with her spend 39% more than those who don't. So who amongst us would not like to say they're responsible for a 39% increase in revenue? I know I certainly would. So some really impressive results there. So also under keeping it real, try to quote unquote break your bot. And I don't mean actually break it, but what I mean by that is find those gaps in your experience. You know, even if you've been really thoughtful about your user experience and the customer journey, there are going to be those places where when the rubber hits the road, you kind of miss a step, you miss something. And this is an example of that here. It's a grocery shopping experience, and you can see artificial intelligence, maybe not that intelligent in this case, but it's completely understandable in terms of how a brand might get there. So it's really important to make sure that you're identifying those gaps in the experience up front as much as possible to be able to prevent them from making their way to your audience ultimately. And you can do it in a number of ways, right? If you're lucky enough to have a budget for this component, you could be very formal and engage a market research firm and actually get your bot in the hands of your potential audience. You could also be much more grassroots about it. You could engage your team and your employees and ask them to help you find ways to improve your bot. So a few tips I want to talk through and leave you with. Building on that idea of keeping it real, WWHD, what would a human do? Again, think about your bot as much as you can as close to a human sort of personification of your brand as you're going to get. So again, think about how perhaps you behave or someone like this persona might behave on your channel. So if it's a text-based bot, how is this person going to respond? Are they going to link out to a funny video or a GIF or, again, an emoji? Think about how they would really react. Secondly, disclose your bothood. So this is the whole idea of, do you say up front that this is a machine or a bot-based experience? Some of you may have recently seen some headlines around Google's new AI experience that can pass for a human on the phone, and there was this sort of coverage and a bit of an uproar, if you will, around the disclosure of, does that bot have to say, I am a machine, I'm a robot? Do you have to know that up front? And so a few days ago, Google came out and said, yes, we are going to disclose that up front so that people know what they're dealing with. You can probably read between the lines and see that I would advise also disclosing that up front. I think it's more about setting expectations with your customers so that they know what they're getting into, and eventually there are going to be limitations with the experience, so better to have them know up front and understand what they're dealing with. Third, including a way out. So what I mean by that is we've probably all been in those frustrating experiences with bots at some point where you just want to talk to a person, like this is not going to answer your question. So I think it's a great insurance policy to have a way out to get your user to a human being or to another form of assistance, so that if you unfortunately do happen to be within that 70% of chatbots requests that aren't fulfilled successfully, you can still maintain a great experience for your audience in that situation. And lastly, use and repurpose existing content. So anyone who's worked with me has probably heard me say, build once, use many times at some point. It's my common refrain when it comes to content. And what I mean by that is, in this case, take a look at the content that you already have, whether it's residing on your social channels or your website or another place altogether. And think about how you can leverage it to make this experience richer for your audience. So an example from BMO, if a customer expresses interest in learning more about buying a home, there's tons of content on BMO's website, videos, articles, calculators, and on that could be linked to really enrich this experience and add more value to the user's journey throughout this. So if I could sum things up, when we think about launching a chatbot, I would absolutely recommend really anchoring yourself in that purpose and that business case, and think about keeping it real. Put yourself in the shoes of your customer and really pressure test your bot and let the rubber hit the road and find those gaps in experiences. And also, lastly, leverage the power of that interactive experience that a bot affords you as a brand. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Hi. I'm just curious, what are some example questions that you put into the bot for it to answer? Just out of curiosity, the type of content you...
For the BMO example? Mm-hmm. Sure. So it could be anything from where's my nearest branch to what's the routing number for BMO Harrison, Illinois, to how do I reset my online banking passwords. So it was really a combination, cross-referencing of those most common questions that we would get asked. And again, there's sort of that win-win. As a brand, it costs us less to be able to deliver that with a chatbot rather than talking to someone. And as a user, I'm a millennial. Sometimes I don't want to pick up the phone or interact with a human being. So it's nice to be able to have that other option. And you get your answer much, much quicker as a consumer as well. So there's that benefit.
So I missed the first, so apologize if you already talked about this, but if I want to use the chatbot for my company, do I have to create, how many questions do I have to create? And assuming the questions, is there a number? You have to have at least 100, otherwise you're going to get in trouble. Or would the chatbots recognize foreign people? Sometimes people don't, I'm a foreign, and sometimes other people email me and it's not proper English. So how would that respond? And what's the best platform to create the chatbot?
Sure. I'll start with the first question in terms of how many questions. I think it's completely fair of you to ask that. So is there, for anyone who didn't hear the question, it was how many questions should I start with in terms of launching that experience and getting it off the ground? So you're probably not going to like this answer, but I think it depends. And I think your litmus test for that will be that whole point of putting yourself in your customer's shoes and testing it out, right? If you put yourself there or you get your customers to test it out, maybe they think there's enough value there with 10 questions. I don't know. Maybe that's not even close. Maybe they, so quickly with a lot of use cases will sort of reach the limitations of that and you find you need 50 or 100. So I think it depends on what your use case is and how narrow you get. But I think it's really about letting the rubber hit the road and going through that experience yourself. Does that help?
Yeah.
Good.
Hi, my name's Elise Terlato, and I work at FCB Global on a healthcare account, and we're looking to use a chatbot. But one of the issues that we run into is incorporating legal. And my question for you is, how do you maintain that conversational style when you're running the risk of all of the legal and regulations that come with certain trigger words, and things along the lines of having your consumer or patient share too much information? I don't know if that is something that is applicable with BMO, but I'm sure with banking and financial issues, there's, kind of a line that has to be drawn as well.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Of course. First, I would say make the legal team your BFFs and, take them out for coffee and drinks and whatever. And I say that jokingly, but I'm also serious. I think it's, in my experience, legal and compliance are great partners at BMO, and it's really important to link arms with them. And, turns out they're reasonable people. And when you sort of embed them in that experience and help them understand what's going on, my experience has been that, you tend to be able to move forward most of the time and manage those risks. So I think that's a really important component, because when you get to that point of terms and conditions or disclosures or, whatever it is that you have to deliver that's legalese, you're going to want a partner who understands the constraints that you're working in with this experience and gives you some flexibility. So, for example, with our BMO skill for Amazon Alexa, there was a point where we were able to say our awesome copywriter wrote a line around, and don't forget to check out bmo.com/yada yada for the stuff that our lawyers want you to know. So it's still getting that point across, but it's doing it in a way that a human being would actually say to another human being versus, all of the fine print. So is that helpful in sort of tackling that? I think I completely identify with you, and I think it's, again, in my experience, really helpful to be able to have a partner in legal and compliance who can really sit with you and, understand that experience.
Hi, Jack from Bird Dog Media. Do you have a certain escalation point where people, you can sense or see that they're getting frustrated, where you kind of just say, you know what, we really recommend that you give us a call? Or do you have people on staff at a customer service center that it might get kicked over to, like, please hold on a moment while we help to get you an answer, and then a live human being might then jump in?
Yeah, so I think one thing that is important to mention on that point is, especially at launch with Twitter quick replies in particular, we didn't force customers into that bot experience to begin with. It was about giving them an option. So would you like to interact with BMO Bolt, or would you like to interact directly with a person? So I think that in itself, giving them the option, again, the more you go in eyes wide open as a consumer, the better your expectations are set around that. And if I'm recalling right, at most points in the journey, there is that way out that I mentioned. So you have an option at some point to say, the equivalent of dial 0 for the operator, you know what I mean, to be connected to an actual person on the other end who can answer that question. Because again, I think that's, it can just be so frustrating as a consumer when you're sort of caught in that endless loop. So giving them that way out is that great insurance policy.
So I don't know if this is anything you've dealt with yet, but being that it's 7 days away, have you built any GDPR compliance into your bots? I mean, I guess it depends if they collect any personal information or if there's a personalized experience at all.
Right. So there's not at this point. So I don't think there would be that implication yet, but it's a great point. If if you have a connection to CRM or customer information in some way, of course. Important.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Awesome.